So I'm Ryan Pack.
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
And this is Soundtrack Your Life, where we talk to a guest about a soundtrack that they feel connected to. Today we have Jen Howell from the EveryRomCom podcast. Welcome, Jen.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on your show today.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast?
Yeah, so EveryRomCom is a podcast I started about 2 years ago. And kind of my motivation for starting it was I was listening to a lot of my husband's film podcasts when we go on a road trip. And like all the time, it seemed like there was a panel of like 3 guys or 4 guys, or sometimes 3 guys and 1 girl. And they were always talking about, movies. Well, not always. I don't want to say always, but often the movies they talked about were either just your standard, Oscar bait, or they were like kind of more genres that are identified with men, right? You rarely heard people talking about romantic comedies. You rarely heard people talking about what we always call, chick flicks, or even like period pieces, right? And I felt that was really sad. And like a lot of times when they even did talk about women's genres, there were things being left out of the conversation, or they were being kind of, underestimated, I felt. So that was kind of my motivation for starting the podcast. Like, I like all kinds of movies. Like horror is my other favorite genre, but I felt romantic comedies were being kind of underrepresented, at least in the sort of film geek space, right? There's a lot of rom-com podcasts that are more like conversational and kind of fun, and that is great too. We try to have some of that on our show as well. But I really kind of wanted EveryRomCom to be like the film geeks romantic comedy podcast. So yeah, that's kind of how I've approached it. I started with a few friends who were big like film fans, or people who had also sort of studied film like I had. And then I've expanded it to having like guests on some are other podcasters. We've had authors, and just people with different perspectives are coming on to the show. And I try to have mostly women, but I do also have some male guests as well. Like, especially sometimes there's romantic comedies where a male opinion is actually more valuable. Like we've covered some like gay male rom-coms like Dashing in December, which is like one of the first kind of Hallmark style rom-coms with a gay couple in it. So yeah, we try to do a kind of diverse range of movies as well. Like we do kind of standard rom-coms, but then we also do things that are kind of like adjacent to the genre. Like we were talking before the show, we did a show on Twister, right? We did a show on True Romance. We did a show on Wet Hot American Summer, because a lot of these movies you don't really think of as romantic comedies. They nevertheless have these really strong rom-com elements in them. So I just love talking about film. I've really enjoyed learning as much as I have about movies doing the show. We're doing a musicals series right now. And like, I had never even watched an Astaire Rogers movies before like doing this podcast. And I learned so much through the research process. And I love just sharing that with people and sharing kind of the film journey I'm going on too. So yeah.
What a cool mission. I love that. I love that you are taking something that traditionally gets like tossed aside as being lightweight, which we do like for stuff like that's, crafted like for a female audience. I feel like, there's a very dismissive kind of like film bro approach to a lot of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Nora Ephron's genius.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much genius in romantic comedies. And I think it's a lot broader than people want to believe, too. So,
yeah. And it's funny, like some of the movies that are even like I would have considered more lightweight, you can still really have an interesting cultural conversation around them. Like we did an episode on She's the Man, and we ended up just kind of exploring like how gender roles had kind of shifted, from when I grew up in the 70s to when people were growing up in the 90s, and like how they had in some ways become more extremely polarized, like over those years when that's not exactly what you might have expected to happen, right? With our culture trying to move forward. So you get into interesting kind of conversations about how these romantic comedies reflect our cultural values. And we like to bring kind of a feminist perspective to it as well. And just, we do have people with like differing opinions too, though. Sometimes one of us will hate a movie, think it's terrible and should be trashed, and the other person will see some value in it. So yeah, we like to have those discussions.
That rules. I love that it's both intelligent and a little bit spicy. This feels like a really good segue into asking you why you chose Flashdance for us today.
Yeah, so the funny thing is Flashdance for me is much more resonant as a soundtrack than it is as a movie, okay? And you're a soundtrack podcast. And I have admired, your podcast and listening to it. And so I wanted to come on, and I thought, what is a soundtrack they haven't covered yet, but it's just like very meaningful to me? And it was Flashdance. I was probably 7 years old or 6 years old when I first heard it. Okay. I was born in 77. Flashdance came out when I was 6. And then I was on this like van trip to Florida with my family. Like, and I'm talking my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my mom, my baby brother. We're all in this van together. We're listening to everybody's music. And like, you know how sometimes those early memories you'll have of music really stick with you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, I remember a lot of music from that trip. We were listening to like The Police, Walking on the Moon. We listened to like Paul Simon, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. But then my uncle gave me his Flashdance tape and his Walkman to borrow. And I put that on, and I became obsessed with that soundtrack. Like, for that whole road trip, I just kept playing it on repeat over and over. And like, this is the way you interacted with music in the 80s, right? With tapes. You didn't like pick and choose. You didn't skip ahead. You just listened to the whole thing. And then you turned it over and you listened to the other side. Maybe sometimes you'd fast forward, but it was a pain, right? So you just listen. And so whether I liked the song or not, they kind of all just became kind of part of me. And I listened to it so much and loved it so much. And my uncle, who was like 16 at the time, he just said, you take it, you take the tape. And I still have that tape. Like, to prepare for this episode, I was listening to the same tape I had when I was 6 years old. Like, it's survived storage facilities and international moves, the whole deal. So
Wow, that's so cool. It's always like a rad uncle, I feel like most of your like education in like the 80s and 90s, your music education came from like a rad uncle or cousin
yeah,
or somebody that like, could pass the knowledge to you. And then that shit gets really deeply imprinted in your brain. Because as you said, there are no skips, there are no options. It's just what you have for the duration of your like 12-hour drive with your parents.
yeah, 100%. And that same uncle is the uncle who gave me my first like other tape, which was, it had Madonna's Like a Virgin on one side, and it had Cyndi Lauper's She's So Unusual on the other side. And that is like the
Yes.
other like big tape I had. And like, the other thing about Flashdance in that whole era is like, I feel like it's an important soundtrack in so many ways, because it was at the birth of the music video era. And in a lot of ways, it spurred on the music video era and the connection between movies and music videos. So I think it's just a really resonant soundtrack in terms of what it brought to the culture. And a lot of my stories, I'll have some more stories about this. I don't think I want to tell them all up top, but I have more stories about this. Flashdance was really part of like the way I formed my sexuality and my attitudes about women and relationships at the time. And some of that came from the soundtrack too. And it really is like, I feel like there's a through line with that and things like Madonna and other cultural figures that women were being inspired by in the 1980s in ways you might not expect. Like, on the surface, Flashdance seems kind of maybe exploitative or objectifying, but like, I think it's more complicated than that, honestly.
Yeah, and you had said that there's something about this movie that's probably more important as a pop cultural artifact when it comes to
Right.
its soundtrack, and maybe less so as a movie. I think everybody knows the iconic moment with Jennifer Beals and the kind of like, dance scene with the
Yeah.
shower and the water. And I feel like that's been replicated so many times everywhere across mediums, from like Family Guy to like, it's sort of a trope
Yeah.
now. It's probably to the point where there are generations of people that don't even know where that's from.
Yeah, like one of the Deadpool 2 posters had that, and like Kelly from The Office did it in Cafe Disco.
Right.
So
Right. Yes. The Cafe Disco moment. That's such a good
yeah,
example.
yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like even the big climax of the movie where she is dancing for her audition for that like dancing conservatory, like I even feel like I think I saw that maybe in film school or somewhere where like I saw just that performance without seeing the rest of the movie.
Mhm.
And like that's iconic too, like
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
break dancing and just like how hard they go with that dance sequence at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. The dance sequences do go really hard, like unnecessarily so almost, right? It's kind of like Footloose to me, where it's the same, like cut away from Kevin Bacon to Kevin Bacon's like stunt double that's doing all this really like fantastic and almost like not realistic dancing, like really physical dancing.
Yeah, I mean, and Flashdance is the one that started that. I mean, that's
Yeah.
like precedes Footloose, precedes Dirty Dancing, precedes so much of our
Right.
80s dance music, and then our 90s dance music culture and 2000s dance movie culture. Like, yeah, the dance movie was almost born again, like in 1983, I feel like.
That's a great point. Like, even if it's not a perfect film, I feel like there was a cascade effect, right? Where like a lot of other films were born out of the popularity of Flashdance.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I lived through it. I'm probably older than you guys, I think. Like, that's my guess.
Barely, because I was born in December of '80, so like I have a recollection of
All right,
Flashdance.
Gen X.
Like it's in my consciousness, right? Like it's there somewhere stuck in the back of my brain. I also have an older sister, and when I say older sister, she's 12 years my
Okay,
senior.
yeah.
She's the one that had like a Purple Rain poster on her wall, and she's the one that was like making me Kraft mac and cheese and like sitting me in front of MTV. So I had like a lot of tender introductions to stuff that I probably didn't have any business watching, but
That was
that's like the latchkey kid.
that was an 80s childhood, and actually in some ways I'm kind of grateful for that kind of childhood. Like, I don't know, like we've talked a few times on my podcast about how kids these days, like it seems like they have all their kids programming and it's separate from the adults programming, but you don't get that experience of talking to an older generation about something you're seeing and kind of learning about adult culture. But sorry, that's like a totally different separate point. So.
No, absolutely though. I just had this conversation last night actually with somebody else where this is kind of a tangent, but kind of related to Flashdance, where like if you're like a little kid, you're like a tiny kid, you should know that Flashdance is a thing. It's not like intended for you. But I remember like listening to like Celine Dion in elementary school and just feeling like I was some kind of divorcee at like 11 years old, which is a really odd, because it's what you had. Like there wasn't choices, you just kind of had the things that were popular and that were huge. The sort of streaming era changes the calculus of that.
But it's funny you say you have no business watching this when you're a kid, because a lot of my stories about Flashdance, I don't know, they might, to some people, they might serve as a cautionary tale about exposing children to this movie. Because, like, is it okay to talk about this, by the way? I don't want to cut off you guys if you're segueing into something.
No, elaborate. I actually want to know.
So yeah, for me, Flashdance, like I was one of those kids, and kids like this exist. I was one of those kids who was very interested in sexuality kind of early, and I had like crushes very early, and I had just like an awareness of sexuality quite early in my life. I mean, it's kind of a chicken or egg situation. Was it Flashdance and Madonna that did it, or was I drawn to those things because of Flashdance and Madonna? Or was I drawn to Flashdance and Madonna because of that? I don't know which it was, but Flashdance is like this deeply sexual album in a lot of ways. It has a lot of hints about sexuality within the lyrics. And then I did watch the movie, after I'd listened to the soundtrack so many times. I probably saw it several times, one way or the other, on cable or something. And I was just like fascinated by several aspects of it. And I was fascinated by the sexual assertiveness and independence of Alex, the character Alex in the movie. But then the dancing, the exhibitionism of the dancing was really like intriguing to me. And I spent many like hours dancing to this album, like in my childhood bedroom, trying to kind of look sexy. I probably had the blinds up at times too, like not on purpose, but like I was just foolish and wasn't like thinking about it really. And it's funny because when you're like 10 or 11, like you can envision yourself as a woman even though you're not sometimes. Like I don't know if you had that experience, but I remember being 10 or 11 and just like seeing myself in this totally different light, dancing to this music, imagining that I was like those women in the movie. And like it really was like an introduction to like being in my body and expressing myself through dance and expressing myself sexually before like I was ready to move on to like some kind of interpersonal interaction with someone else. And I don't know. It's funny. People might think that that's weird or like kids aren't sexual, but some kids start to have those feelings early, right? And I was one of them. And so this tape was like really part of that exploration for me. Like, so you take even the song like Seduce Me Tonight, which is in that strip club scene, which like is the dirty, terrible part of the movie, right? Like you're like, no, you're not supposed to be. That was kind of intriguing to me too. There's a line in that song that was like, show me all the secrets hidden in your thighs, in your thighs. And when I was a kid, I was just like, I thought that was so intriguing and erotic. And like, I was drawn to like finding out what that meant. I was the kid who was reading classic literature like Madame Bovary trying to find out about sex, right? Because like we didn't have, internet porn back then. And I'm glad we didn't have internet porn. You just had to find secrets here and there in your music or in your literature. So that's another part of why Flashdance has stuck with me, is that like early, like being drawn to that exhibitionism, being drawn to that like female sexuality and trying to explore it and try it on.
I think this is an important point, right? I feel like there's a lot of like historical look backs at the 80s where, people tend to see the 80s as being very uptight and repressed. But I don't know that that's entirely true. I think that's kind of an oversimplification of a lot of the things that were happening in media in particular that were really at odds with that. And like you said, I think, the influence of somebody like Giorgio Moroder, for example, like on the soundtrack of this movie, brings this like kind of crazy like 70s exhibitionism, slinkiness, like to the music and to like what it's bringing, that it, is very like not Reagan era the time, right? Like it's something very different and much freer and much looser. So I can understand how you would watch something like that and be like, oh, this holds many mysteries.
Well, the other thing is, like, I actually don't think of the 80s as being too sexually repressed, because this is, like, also the decade of Madonna, right? Like, this is Madonna and Janet Jackson also, like, these very powerful women, like, sexually assertive, independent women, like, and they were also playing with gender a lot. They would wear, like, men's suits in some videos and things like that. They would play roles and go back and forth. And they were more sexual subjects than they were objects. Like you go like into the late 90s, you start to get stuff like Britney Spears where she's almost more like acting like a baby a little bit, or like talking about how she's a virgin, right? Like it was such a big deal. She was supposedly a virgin. Madonna is instead, quote, air quotes, like a virgin, right? She's not a virgin. It's a woman being unashamed to be sexual, and like I grew up with that, and I'm so glad honestly that I grew up with like these kind of powerful women. Like women were still being objectified, but like they were kind of taking more control of that, I feel like, in the 80s than maybe they even did in the late 90s, sadly. I don't know. That's my perspective.
No,
anyway.
for sure. No, I think it's a good perspective. I think it's one that doesn't get talked about maybe often enough as we think back on the 80s. I think this is a good way to pivot also to maybe the two biggest hits off of this soundtrack, Maniac and What a Feeling, which were enormous pop hits. I think that they were so ubiquitous, you probably couldn't avoid them at a certain point in 1983.
Yeah, I mean, the soundtrack sold 6 million copies. And I think What a Feeling did get to number one on the Billboard charts as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I feel like I looked up how long it was on the Billboard charts, but I don't remember now. But it was a huge song. And Irene Cara's work on that like was so important. Like, did you guys hear that she sued apparently because she wasn't getting enough royalties for that though? That was sad to hear.
Oh wow! So she made like a bad deal and didn't get what she should have been getting from it.
Yeah, I guess she did eventually win, but then they claimed bankruptcy, so she never got really much money. She got a bigger share of the royalties eventually. Yeah.
Oh wow! Yeah.
It was number one for 6 weeks, and it was on the charts for 25.
Nice.
That is such a long time. I mean, that's really dominant. It also, Flashdance What a Feeling was Best Original Song that year at the Academy Awards. Am I getting that right? And then I think Maniac was also nominated. So you had two in the same category from one movie, which is really unusual. And I think really proves how big a deal this was in its moment.
Yeah, I didn't really like that. Wasn't my favorite song from the soundtrack, but that is, like you said, Ryan, that scene that it played during the audition scene was such an important scene and so iconic. And like, I mean, who doesn't love that inspirational, changing those snotty judges' minds and getting them on her side that the song, went to.
Right. I think it's like Ryan said earlier, even if you've never seen this film, you've probably seen some either like replicated version, parody version of like that scene, or you've seen like a cut, that you've seen a clip. Right.
Yeah.
So it kind of like it's taken on a little bit of a life of its own over time.
Did you see JLo did a whole Flashdance video? I can't remember what it was called, but she did a whole Flashdance video where she basically cosplayed Alex in the movie.
Yeah, somewhere in my pop culture brain, I definitely remember that happening. And I'm sure she's not the only one. I feel like there are probably other examples of that in music video. There's got to be.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I can't put my finger on where it came from.
Yeah, I would need to be a way bigger J-Lo fan for that to happen.
Oh,
Yeah, you guys are.
sorry.
Oh,
It
sorry.
was
Ryan, go ahead, I'm sorry.
2002. She did a music video for the song "I'm Glad," which I don't remember, but it was nominated for the MTV Video Music Award for Best Choreography. But she is in this still on the internet. She is wearing like the same sweatshirt that Alex is wearing in the cover on the poster of Flashdance. I mean, J-Lo can dance, so I understand.
Yeah, makes sense.
Well, you guys are both talking about like the biggest hits, and it's funny. I was like a B-side person for this tape, like, and I think literally side B of the tape are the songs I like the best. I was talking about the independent women before. I loved the song "Manhunt." Like that song was so evocative to me, and the scene in the movie was Cynthia Rhodes, of course, who's Penny in Dirty Dancing. You know, doing her own dancing, doing that backflip off the wall. Like Manhunt is like the ultimate, like I'm taking control in my hands. I'm going to ask people out myself. Like I grew up to be a woman who asked men out. Like I'm an independent woman. And like that song meant so much to me, I think, growing up. It was like an anthem. So there were songs that didn't even get released from this tape that I just absolutely love. And like Imagination, He's a Dream are such weird, interesting songs with interesting lyrics. So the whole tape really resonates with me. I'm sorry if I'm cutting ahead. If I'm skipping ahead, let me know and we'll talk later. But in the Imagination song, like it's got this lyric like the magic of the secret door, I can take you down and show you more. Like those are like lyrics, you just listen to them and you're like, you're a kid and you're like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? You're just like, what's going on in this song?
Honestly, this conversation is really making me wonder if like we're going backwards or forwards in terms of how like Puritan we are about pop music and culture. We might actually be going backwards.
Well, when you see all the Twitter stuff about sex scenes, I'm like, that is a little bit mysterious to me. Like, have you seen that Twitter discourse about like how why are there sex scenes in movies? I'm like, I don't know, because sex is a thing that happens. Like, why are there scenes of people being blown up in movies? You know what I mean? Like, which of these things is worse? I don't know. And also, like in terms of I also want to just mention too, like this is a soundtrack podcast, but I want to just mention Adrian Lyne. Like this was Adrian Lyne, the director's first significant movie, and he is like the person who does like he doesn't like to call them erotic thrillers, but he does a lot of erotic thrillers or erotic dramas. And like I realized I had seen almost all of his movies when I was prepping for the show. I was like, whoa, I guess I'm an Adrian Lyne fan.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Yeah, I feel like people over time have maybe come to view this as like, I don't know, something that's not like boutique or fringe or whatever, but there is like an eroticism to this film, right? That we're talking about that is maybe a little out of the mainstream. So it's interesting that was the case. And this is also produced by Jerry Bruckheimer.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yep.
I feel like in my brain, I'm like, is that true?
Yeah,
this is like
it doesn't sound like it makes sense.
Right?
Bruckheimer and Simpson. Yeah, the big action dudes of the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody blows up in this movie.
Nobody blows up.
Yep.
Well, her career blows up.
Oh, there you go.
She does throw a brick through a window.
And it's like, it's written by the guy who wrote Basic Instinct later too. Like this is a whole package of like 80s weirdness just coinciding in one place.
That is so interesting. Another kind of like iconic female lead in film. Wow, it's super interesting. I feel like the influence of this movie is now, the more that we're talking about it, I'm like, underrated. It was the OG. It's like the genesis of everything. Gosh.
I have a fun little Adrian Lyne fact about this film. So I guess Brian De Palma was at one point in talks to direct Flashdance. Okay. But then he passed on it to do Scarface.
Well.
And then Brian, which was also scored by Giorgio Moroder, which is another little connection here.
Right.
And then Lyne also did Fatal Attraction, which is another movie that was originally going to be directed by Brian De Palma.
Oh, that's interesting. Was De Palma the one who did American Gigolo, where Moroder also did the soundtrack? I can't remember, actually. Like, American Gigolo has a fantastic soundtrack, by the way, the Moroder soundtrack, and then it uses Blondie, and it was one of the first movies to use like that kind of music so prominently, and that's a great movie too. It's very stylish.
That is a great movie. And again, there's kind of that marauder led bleed between like, I feel like 70s and early 80s, where every decade is kind of a continuation of the last decade until you're like 5 years in, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. At least that's my like theory.
That there's a certain truth to that. Yeah, for sure. Let's see. I'm looking it up too because I'm like one of those people who needs to know things immediately. It's terrible.
Yeah, that was Paul
Paul
Schrader.
Schrader. Okay, never mind. Misspoke. Okay, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, Marauder was everywhere in the 80s, and I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah.
So, he obviously did not all the songs, but he scored this movie, and he did a few of the songs on this soundtrack. He did Top Gun's Danger Zone and Take My Breath Away. And then he like scored Scarface. Like he's got his fingerprints all over like the 80s.
The one that got me was I saw that he did Cat People, like the David Bowie song from Cat People, the one they use in Inglourious Bastards. I was just like, oh my God, that song is epic. And he did that. And he did like pretty much all of my favorite Donna Summer songs, including he did the Donna. No, maybe he didn't do the Donna Summer song on this soundtrack. Let me see. Romeo. I love Romeo. I didn't even realize it was Donna Summer until years later either, but I love that song so much.
He didn't do this Donna Summer song. I think there was a song they ended up cutting from the film that he did with Donna Summer, though.
Right, because somewhere, and I don't know if there's been, I don't have this information in front of me. Everybody furiously Google it right now. He also made additional tracks for this movie that didn't make it on the soundtrack, right?
Right.
As is usually the case. Like I think he kind of overdid it. He's a very prolific dude.
Let's also connect this movie. We talked about Flashdance a few episodes ago in our Full Monty episode, because in the movie The Full Monty, they shoplift a copy of Flashdance so they can watch it because they're learning to erotic dance. And they watch the epic sequence. And since they're all steel workers, one of the main characters, Dave, isn't paying attention to the dancing and just complaining about how bad of a welder she is.
Right. Because what we haven't discussed yet is that like I think one of the more like absurdist like plot points in this is that she's like this like steel mill, steel town like girl like working in Pittsburgh or
yeah, and she's 18.
Yeah,
right.
But, okay, interestingly, though, there's a few scenes after that where somebody says, how long does it take to dance like this? And she says, about 25 years. And I'm like, did the script supervisor not realize that she like was possibly two different ages? Because 25 makes more sense. 25, I buy that she's a welder with like a really cool loft and a night job doing this burlesque dance, whatever thing. Yeah, like, so my headcanon is she is 25. That's my headcanon now.
I like that. I think it's the part of it, you're right, where she's like 18. I'm like, what are the child labor laws? Like, how long have you been in that?
I mean, it's problematic that her boss is hitting on her, but it's less problematic that she's 25 instead of 18.
Yeah.
Interestingly, in the 80s, it was totally not problematic, though, that her boss was hitting on her. I mean, like, in the 80s, that was, like, how you met people, I guess, right? Like even when I started working at, like, 18 or 19, which was by the mid-90s, like, people were having, relationships with their coworkers and possibly their superiors. So like the culture has changed so much around that, like in this short amount of time. Well, it's actually not short. I'm kind of old now, but there you go.
And like I work in advertising, so this sort of thing still happens.
Yeah, I like how he literally says, she goes, "Oh, I don't want to date my boss," and he goes, "Okay, you're fired. I'll pick you up at 7."
Yeah,
or whatever.
That's a pretty lame joke. That is not great. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of lame jokes, there was a line cut from the movie that Adrian line like is really sad about, and it's when they go to have that fancy dinner. Like in the script, she's supposed to get like a plate of broccoli, and she's supposed to be like, "What am I supposed to do with these little trees?"
Yeah, I feel like we did have broccoli in the 80s, so that's weird. Like
that's a very weird. Like you've seen broccoli, like you've been around.
But like Adrian Lyne is like really sad that he had to cut that from the movie.
Really? That was the darling he was sad to kill? That's a very odd thing to lament.
Yeah, I don't know. Was the theory being that she like grew up like really underprivileged to the point where she'd never seen a piece of broccoli? I don't really understand that. Yeah. She lived in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Like, Like, it is trying to show that she's working class. I mean, maybe it's part of that. Like, I think that is one of the interesting aspects of the film is that she's a working class person. She's a bike commuter. She's a blue collar job. She, she's doing it for herself. And then she goes to that dance academy and she feels like she doesn't fit in because everybody's had this pedigreed education with their dance lessons. So, I mean, I guess maybe that was trying to fit in with that, but it's kind of a weird fit. Yeah.
I also feel like an incredibly like frequent 80s trope, right? Where it's like you have to like prove yourself to like the prep school or, whatever like elite entity or like bubble you're trying to burst.
Yeah.
It's like all over 80s movies.
Yes.
It's like there's always that climactic scene of like, I showed him.
100%.
Yeah, it's basically Dance Academy Revenge of the Nerds.
Or one crazy summer, or that's the one that comes to mind immediately for me.
Like every John Hughes movie.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah.
So, one thing that I caught, I didn't know Lee Ving was in this movie, and I'm not sure if you guys know who Lee Ving is.
So.
I don't.
So he's the one that plays Johnny C, who basically opens the strip club.
Yeah.
And he's kind of the villain of the movie. So Lee Ving, I guess his day job would be, I mean, I guess he's been in a couple other movies. He's been in Streets of Fire and Clue, but he's best known for being in a band called Fear, kind of a hardcore punk band. And I kind of learned about Fear by watching a Dave Grohl's Sound City documentary. And he interviews Lee, and they're just talking about music, and then it cuts to Dave Grohl and like his van or whatever, his truck, and he goes, I can't believe the sounds that come out of this guy's mouth, because he just kind of has this really like guttural scream. So I was like, wait, is that Lee Ving in this movie? And I just thought it was so interesting that he's in. I mean, I guess Iggy Pop acts sometimes and stuff like that. Not that I think they're equally talented, but rock stars show up in movies pretty regularly, but I was just like, oh, he's in here.
That's cool. That's like totally something that went way over my head. I would not have picked that up. So that's awesome. Yeah.
Let's that's a good segue into castings. There's some interesting casting tidbits about this film. So there were a few different candidates for the role that eventually goes to Jennifer Beals. Demi Moore was one of the other candidates. And apparently, she was chosen because the then Paramount president, Michael Eisner, who I feel like we talk about way too much on this podcast, Michael Eisner asked his secretaries at the studio to look at all of the test screenings and pick someone.
Oh, yeah. And I heard that. And that's why they chose Jennifer Beals, because she had that kind of girl next door appeal to people or something. She seemed relatable. Yeah.
I can totally see Demi Moore in this part, though, too, because she has that combination of like sultriness and strength.
Yeah.
She will later appear in Adrian Lynn's Indecent Proposal.
Yeah, which...
Oh, hey! See that?
Which is a total guilty pleasure for me. Like, most of Adrian Lyne's films are guilty pleasures for me, to be honest. Although I think he actually made a better Lolita than Kubrick. Like, I'll, die on that hill.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to die on that hill with you. I think I would agree. Also, I don't even think those movies are guilty pleasures. I think they're like straight up really entertaining. They're just super entertaining films. And then the role of Nick Hurley was originally offered to Kiss frontman Gene Simmons.
What? Really?
Which is gross and weird. And I guess he turned it down because he was like, yeah, I feel like that kind of conflicts with my image, which is a hilarious thing to think. I think it's really because he's just super uncomfortable without the Kiss makeup. Right?
Huh. That's really interesting. I don't know why somebody would think of him for the role. Like, that's just kind of mystifying to me. Yeah.
Yeah, if he was going to be Johnny C, I could see that, but not Nick.
Yeah, super, super strange. I don't get that casting at all, especially when it also sounds like, and again, interconnected things here, Pierce Brosnan, De Niro, Richard Gere, Mel Gibson, they were all considered for the part too. So crazy that they had all of these people up for it that are probably way more well known, and then it eventually went to somebody who really wasn't,
and more talented as an actor.
Right.
I think he does all right. And I think he allows Jennifer Beals to shine too. Like I think it's important that the female character is the stronger and more centered character in the movie. So I think if a guy was acting a little more, it actually might take away from that in a way. I don't know.
That's a good point. And I think maybe that's whether it was intended or not, it really is a vehicle for her. It's her stage. It's her film.
Yeah, and the other dancers too. Like, I just loved like having the other women in the movie. Although one thing that was really glaring to me is that like they let most of the women have highlight dances, but not the black dancer. She did not get a highlight dance, and I'm like, what's up with that? Not cool. So I would have liked to see that, but
that's very. I don't know if anybody watched this series on Hulu, the Chippendales series on Hulu. It's all about like the founder of Chippendales and how he like goes on to like murder his business partner. It's very dramatic. It's actually pretty good. Camille Nanjiani is in it as the main role, the lead role. But yeah, there's like this whole plot thread in there about how apparently at the real life Chippendales Club, he didn't want to allow African American dancers at all, and he wouldn't allow the one dancer that he had that was black to like be in their calendar.
Oh.
So I think there was that was a very real problem, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, she's in the movie, but we just don't get a featured dance that we see of that dancer. And maybe she wasn't a dancer. Maybe they cast someone who wasn't even a dancer in that role. I don't know. Not that affected Jennifer Beals getting to do all the dances. Did you both research about the final scene, how there were actually like Jennifer Beals and then 3 body doubles in that last scene? Did you see?
Yep.
Do you want to tell about it? I can, or like.
Let's talk about that, because honestly, I find all of this movie magic stuff like super fascinating.
Yeah, like there's a gymnast and her regular dance double who was like Maureen Jahan, I think was her name. And then there's a male breakdancer too that like refused to shave his mustache, I guess. So they had to hide his face.
I believe his name was Crazy Legs.
That sounds right.
Crazy Legs.
I mean, if you're gonna be a break dancer, you should have a name like Crazy Legs.
I just like it's just very straightforward. Like, yeah, I got crazy legs. I'm Crazy Legs.
Oh yeah, Richard Crazy Legs Cologne or something like that. Yeah.
That's incredible. I wish that's like straight out of like a name generator.
But the studio didn't list them in the credits because they wanted people to actually believe that Jennifer Beals could do all of this on her own.
She's like.
Which is crazy. It's amazing that you're allowed to do that. Like, can you still do that? I don't think you can do that anymore. There's gotta be, like,
only if you're Tom Cruise.
Yeah. No, I just mean there's got to be like SAG rules around like, and you can't not credit body doubles.
So it's interesting too, because like this is like a real change in like musical or music movie culture too, because like I was reading a biography of Gene Kelly and he was just commenting upon when Flashdance came out that he really thought it was a shame that we were starting to make movies with body doubles and like instead of having dancers doing roles.
That man is so fucking ridiculous.
I love Gene Kelly. Oh no, he's my new boyfriend. I'm telling you. Like I read all about him and like watched his movies and I'm like he could be a bit arrogant, but like man, I respect his craft and I
No, I love Gene Kelly, but that man is fucking crazy.
But I think it is a good point though that like we went from like a kind of a culture where people like really perfected their dancing and their singing and their acting to like a culture where like we just piece things together and it's not necessarily bad, but it's a big change. Like, and it is harder to mount a musical the way they used to mount musicals because of that, because we're used to having one category of people are actors, one category of people are dancers, one category are singers. You don't have these like multi-talents as much anymore, I think.
Before we continue with our episode, here's a word from our sponsor.
Enjoy listening to podcasts and ever wonder, can I make a podcast? But it seems so complicated, and good audio production can take time. What if there was a way to create an amazing podcast easily? Well, now there is. Introducing Podcasting Made Easy from Podtastic Audio. My production team will handle your entire audio production, allowing you to be the star of your show. This is Podcasting Made Easy. How easy? Well, so easy, you don't even have to press record. Now that's easy. Your listeners are waiting. Let's deliver. Sign up for a free strategy call today at podtasticaudio.com/easy.
Well, some things are underappreciated in their time. Roger Ebert didn't like this movie. I think it came out to a lot of Flashdance, a lot of negative reviews. Roger
Right.
Ebert's line was, "It's great sound in Flashdance signifying nothing," which sounds like such a Roger Ebert line. So again, I think like it got kind of dismissed as being like a lightweight movie, right? But it became this kind of cultural touchstone.
Well, what's one of the reasons it's dismissed as lightweight? It's like female protagonist, and a lot of the characters are women. I mean, I think that is a part of it, honestly. I really do. Like, even if it has this like sexual element that like might titillate men too, but it's still a woman protagonist. It does pass the Bechdel test, like talking about dance with her older woman friend and like, just her life concerns. Like, so yeah, I don't know. Ebert, I love Ebert. I admire his work, but like sometimes I think he didn't get movies that were centered around women. Not always.
Or maybe he didn't like the Pollock jokes.
Oh God, that like what is with that guy? Like, I mean, I remember those jokes being a thing that people did in the 80s. I never understood what the hell that was about, but.
And then he like laughs at his own jokes.
I mean,
it must be some kind of like, this is how we're going to tell people, like people are working class. I don't know.
Yeah, something. Yeah. We are not surprised when Richie comes back from LA. We are not.
No. Maybe it's to show like he's not going to make it. Like you'll know he's not going to make it because he's just going to tell Pollock jokes. Like I always get fascinated when you have someone who's kind of like a creative in a movie and you have to like show that they're creative, but you can't give them good enough ideas where like it would pass, like you should take that as your own and not use it in a movie. Like if you had a writer, right? Like you can't have them write something that is good enough that it should actually get published.
Yeah, 100%. I see that.
So you can't have a comedian that it's actually like so funny where it's like, oh, actually a real comedian should be telling these jokes. And also Richie's annoying, so you got to make sure that like he tells jokes an annoying person would tell. Someone that works in the kitchen of the erotic dance club.
Yeah, like can we talk about this dance club too? And like this is like, I mean, I know there are burlesque clubs, but I find it hard to believe that this particular club would exist. You know what I mean? Like they're doing artistic dances and like they're sexy, certainly, and fun to watch, but they're not like sexy enough to be like really a strip club, but it's not really like a high class enough place to seem like it's an art club. It's just totally wild vibe they got going on there. And there's that one like totally experimental scene.
With the TV,
I think
right?
That's the song "Imagination" is in there, and it's just like there's strobe lights happening in a crazy like costume that looks like a Bjork video, and like I mean that's the moment too where this movie most embodies like MTV to me, like where it just looks like it's straight off of what you would have seen in the early 80s on MTV. That scene, yeah, and I know they clipped a couple of the things for MTV. I don't know if Imagination in that TV scene was one of them, but like, yeah, it's such a avant-garde thing going on in this club. What's up with that?
Right? It is kind of avant-garde, like weird production value.
Yeah, like even the dance at the beginning where she pulls the thing and water comes on and dumps water on her, like I feel like even that would be like a little too like cool for a burlesque club.
Yeah, and these guys are just like hanging out drinking beer, like purportedly maybe after their job at the welding factory where who knows what they're welding, and yeah.
Who knows what they're welding is such a good point. We never find out. Who knows?
Right.
He
just owns this company where like a bunch of people just like bang shit all day.
No, totally. Not to sound preoccupied by Chippendales, and I don't know where in like the 80s timeline like this falls versus like Chippendales, but maybe there was some kind of like pressure to make it like a stage show or something, as opposed to just like a down and dirty strip club in Pennsylvania. I don't know.
There's definitely
it makes a better movie though, like, and it's with a weirder set piece.
It's really interesting too how the Malby's club that she's dancing in is really like contrasted against that strip club. So you see in the Malby's club, each woman comes on separately. They have their costume, they have their bit, they have a totally different set design. Then you go to the strip club and it's really just like a buffet table of completely naked women, just kind of lackadaisically like swaying this way and that, maybe moving their legs back and forth a little bit, right? This is your one nudity scene in the movie too. And like, I don't know. That made a big impression on me when I was a kid. I was like, that kind of sexy dancing, good. That kind of sexy dancing, bad. Like it was,
Right.
it's like there.
Right. It is, no, definitely. Like it's that thing that happens inside you when you're in a strip club that you feel bad about being in versus when you're in one that you're like, okay, I feel like people are being like fairly compensated and protected.
Yeah, it almost felt like he was trying to traffic her, like that actor you were talking about before, who had the strip club. It felt like he was trying to traffic Alex into the strip club at one point, like he's trying to drag her in there or something. I'm like, what? Like, which I mean, probably does happen. Of course, people get trafficked into sex work sometimes, but probably not like that. Probably not like from across the street at the other club, and she has her own job as a welder. But whatever, yeah.
No, but there is definitely a contrast where like they definitely show this strip club as like you're throwing your life away, but at this artsy burlesque club, like no, you're just working your way up to what you want to do.
And you know what
you still have dreams.
You know what I also just noticed? Like the song playing in the strip club, "Seduce Me Tonight," is one of the only songs on the soundtrack voiced by a man, with a man's voice on it. The songs the women are dancing to are almost all, I think they all are with women vocalists. And you have Maniac. Well, that's not at the club, but you have Maniac, which is a man. And then you have Lady, 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 which is that love song that I didn't like it when I was a kid. I think it's really beautiful now. They're dancing to a men's voice in a seedy club, and they're not differentiated. They're just like a bunch of naked women on a table. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great point. That feels like it was probably intentional.
So I just wanted to add, so the non-Marauder songs on the soundtrack were basically sourced by Phil Ramone, no relation to the punk band. But Phil Ramone, he's a pretty accomplished person on his own right, even though he's not related to the Ramones. He was a producer engineer. He's won many Grammys, mostly for working with Billy Joel. But he also got a Grammy for, helping put together the Flashdance soundtrack. So whether it was intentional or not, like you have some pretty... I know we had talked about like on the film side with, Adrian Lyne and Jerry Bruckheimer, but on the music side with alongside Marauder, you have Phil Ramone putting together this mix of music, which obviously, sold 6 million copies and was one of the highest selling soundtracks of all time.
Yeah, I think it's a great mix. I think it's a great like early 80s kind of mix of sounds on there too. Like there's some kind of weirder stuff, there's some ballads, there's some dance songs. It's like, I mean, obviously I think it's a great mix because I listened to it nonstop in the 80s. So, and I'll still listen to it sometimes now. Do you both of you, do you either, like, I'm curious because I told my experience, did either of you have experience with this soundtrack or own it, or like any songs that resonated with you at the time?
I think at the time that it came out, I was a little too young, but because it had such a long life that extended beyond the year that this movie was released and probably at peak popularity through MTV and in theaters, it felt like it was always there. So I think I'm at that age where it feels like it is just like assimilated into like a part of my identity. And I've never like known a time where I didn't know a lot of these songs. The deeper cuts I was less familiar with until later on, which is typical. You sometimes when you're too young for something, you go on to like rediscover it in a deeper way later.
Yeah.
I don't know, Ryan, is that kind of your experience where you're just like, well, my life has always been Flashdance. It's always been there.
Yeah, I think that Maniac, like the two big songs, like I feel like I've known them forever, even if I didn't know they were from this movie. It's kind of like Purple Rain. Like I was 2 when Purple Rain came out, but I knew all the songs. Like when I heard the soundtrack, like when I like sat down and listened to them, I was like, I know all 9 of these songs. So Flashdance kind of had a similar thing. Maybe not all the songs, but there was definitely, this is from Flashdance. Oh, this is also from Flashdance. It definitely had that effect. And I'm sure part of it is because, like Nicole, I have older siblings who were of the age where like Flashdance was like appropriate for them, but I was literally an infant when it came out. But, probably just from like car rides and from watching MTV with them, like I'm sure that I became familiar with some of these songs just kind of through osmosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's been like I had my favorites when I was a kid, which were like Manhunt and Romeo and probably What a Feeling. And then like there were songs I didn't like, but like I said, because it was a tape, I would listen to them anyway. And I came back to it for this, and I was like, I really love "I'll Be Here Where the Heart Is." That Kim Carnes vocal, it's so beautiful. Did not relate to it when I was a kid. Now I'm like, oh yeah, I feel this song. And that Lady, Lady, Lady came back for me. It was in Call Me by Your Name, which is very appropriate because that film's set in 1983. So there's a scene where there's a slow dance to Lady, Lady, Lady. And I was like, oh, that feels fresh again. That feels new. It's actually on the soundtrack to Call Me by Your Name too. So, which is also a very interesting soundtrack.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That is actually really cool because I'm sure that they thought about that. I'm sure this movie soundtrack was in that supervisor's mind when they made that choice.
Yeah.
Had to be.
Yeah, because like the album like was pretty big in Europe too. I think like it was probably pretty prominent over there. I mean, I might be wrong about that, so I'm sorry. I should probably didn't speak out of turn.
Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. And again, like I don't have any evidence of this either, but between like the Marauder connection and the fact that this seemed to have been like a global phenomenon and is probably pretty easy to translate into a multitude of languages. Like it's a story that's pretty visual.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it was popular like the world over. It has to be.
Yeah, it was 9 times platinum in Canada. It debuted on the UK charts at number 9 and spent 30 weeks on that chart. It was the best-selling album of 1983 in Japan.
Wow, I like it.
Dang, big in Japan.
Yep, Australia, Austria, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland went it was also 4 times platinum there.
Cool.
And was number 1 in all those countries. So, yeah, I would definitely call it a global hit. And in 2011, Time Magazine listed it as one of the top 25 movie soundtracks. And it had sold 20 million copies as of 2011.
Wow.
Yeah, if my
top 25.
If my tape ever breaks, I'll buy a new one maybe. I'll add to the millions.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the soundtracks from the 80s that you can still easily buy.
That's true. Is it really, like, I haven't actually tried. Is it pretty hard to buy a lot of the 80s soundtracks?
I feel like cassette tapes in general, depending on what they are, can be scarce, and they actually will, like, catch a pretty high price depending on what they are. This one I think you can probably get still relatively cheap because they made so many of them.
Oh, I wouldn't need it to be a tape. I still have a tape player. But, yeah.
You're like, doesn't have to be that.
Yeah.
I think the like really big soundtracks like Top Gun and Flashdance, Purple Rain, like those are like still very easy to find, you know, because they sold so many millions of copies. But like a lot of 90s soundtracks that weren't like major hits like The Crow or like singles, like a lot of those are hard to find now. And now like soundtrack vinyl has become like a really like big collector's thing because of that.
Yeah. Really wish I still had my Some Kind of Wonderful vinyl. Oh my God, I should never have let that go. Yeah, I wanted to, like, there's some other, like, influences from Flashdance, like, that, I don't know if, like, this is less soundtrack related, so if you can cut it if you want, but, like, some other influences from Flashdance, like, was the fashion, like, that, do you remember that whole leg warmer thing and the torn sweatshirt thing? Like, that is from this movie. I remember owning like several pairs of leg warmers and begging my mom, can I have another pair of leg warmers? And she says, you don't even dance. Why do you need these leg warmers? She did not understand. And it's got that fashion influence. And then it's also got, I think it helped a little bit to break out breakdancing too. Just a little bit of breakdancing you see in the movie, that one scene. Because Breaking, the movie, came out in 1984. And I think that probably helped it along a little bit. I don't know, like, those are some cultural influences I noticed from this movie as well.
I'm going to tell a really ridiculous story. So in high school, and I graduated high school in 99 for reference. In high school, we had a group project in senior year where each of us had to make a video about a particular decade. And the video could be scripted however we wanted it to be. And I remember very vividly that we grabbed like somebody's camcorder, because that's how long ago this was. And the opening of our video was all like Footloose and Flashdance. It was literally like the opening sequence of like Footloose with the beat and then like a transition into like leg warmers, exactly what you're saying, and like Flashdance. I think it might have been like What a Feeling or something. But yeah, like that's it. Basically, was the '80s. I feel like it defined like a certain era of fashion too.
Yeah.
So beyond just like the music, it kind of like was a whole cultural shift.
And definitely the kind of long extended dance performances, you know, the kind of music video sort of elements of the movie. Definitely you see again in Purple Rain.
Yeah.
Well, because MTV made this film arguably, I think, succeed in the way that it did, because that's something that people could like constantly view, like pieces of this, and that drove interest in the movie. Is the idea that they had this soundtrack and this very like youth-oriented music tie-in, and you know, as you already said, Jen, I feel like that created this effect where a lot of other movies took cues from that and created like similar. There was a lot of similar like filmmaking that fell out of that because of MTV and because of the way you could market.
Yeah, and it probably helped create create the culture of like having a really good soundtrack for your movie, recruiting people for your soundtrack that would like be able to put them on MTV. You'd be able to use that free marketing essentially. I actually kind of miss that element. I actually kind of miss a movie having its big song that you watch on MTV. Like I remember like the excitement of that, like when Robin Hood Prince of Thieves was about to come out. Like I was a big dork for that movie, and everything I do it for you video. I would watch it and be like, yes, like this looks so good. And then afterwards I watch it like, yes, remembering the movie. These videos with these clips from the movies, I just loved them. And it's kind of a lost culture in a way, because nobody's like really going to YouTube and watching some music video that shows scenes from a movie, I don't think, anymore, or TikTok or like whatever. Like, well, TikTok, you'd have to have a longer video, and they don't usually. So yeah.
So I have a kind of funny story. So my sister used to have like friends and family over for like Thanksgiving and stuff. And she's 12 years older than me. So it's like Thanksgiving or something. And I'm a film major in college, and I'm all excited to talk to people about how much I know about movies. And I'm talking to this guy, and he's like, oh, I've directed a couple things, and, it seems like you're very knowledgeable, and, you should keep on working towards whatever you want to do, screenwriting, directing, whatever. And I was like, sorry, I didn't get your name. And he goes, oh, my name is Brian De Palma. but not that Brian De Palma.
Wait, what? You're talking about like he was not the Brian De Palma. He was just
he's not the Brian De Palma. But I was like, you know how hard it has to be named Brian De Palma, where you're a filmmaker, but you're not the Brian De Palma? Like, do you know how many like disappointed people like you've probably met in your life?
No, you have to change your name to like Ryan Palmer. You don't stay another Brian De Palma. It doesn't work like that.
Like, when you use imdb.com and you type in Brian De Palma, it's like Brian De Palma 1, and it has like, all the big movies that he's done, and then there's Brian De Palma 2. He's Brian De Palma 2.
I guess it's better than being Brian De Palma, you're not there. So there you go. That's the bright side.
Yeah, right. But it's like being named Michael Jordan, but being bad at basketball.
I have an accountant at my work whose name is Bruce Lee.
Nice.
But he's an accountant, and that always makes me laugh.
I'd feel pretty awesome if my name was Bruce Lee and I was an accountant. I don't know. I like that. Just be like, I am the Bruce Lee of accounting. So there you go. Like, I'm the best at this.
I hope he really leans into, I don't know him. I just get finance emails from him sometimes.
You should try to pick a fight with him.
See how that goes.
And then you'll know for sure. Yeah, my best friend went to college in Pittsburgh. And so he had gone to like the same private school like his entire K through 12. So he has a Korean first name, but for 12 years he didn't have to worry about it. Like, you correct people once, and then people know how to say your name, and you don't worry about it. But then when he got to college, nobody knew how to say his name, and his last name is Lee, so he started going by Bruce because it was funny. So I also know Bruce Lee, but it's more because he got annoyed that he was getting emails for international students.
So he chose that life.
Wait, so like you brought up Pittsburgh. like, because you're a friend, like, I don't know if any of you been to Pittsburgh, like, that's in this movie, and like, what I thought it was pretty awesome. Like, I always like it when you see a movie that's set in like a secondary city, you know, like I always love that, and the Pittsburgh vibe. Have either of you been there? Like, did you like the setting there in the movie?
I mean, I wouldn't go to like the areas that she lives in. Like, I wouldn't. I wasn't. You know, as a tourist, I wasn't like, take me to like the places where I might get mugged.
I just meant like, do you like the way they use the setting in the movie, or they use the secondary city? Because I'm always like, I just love it when like you've got a rom-com set in Baltimore, or you've got like, you know, just like it's not like LA, New York, Chicago all the time. I just like having that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the working class backdrop, and I thought, I mean, I guess that's why she's a welder, because they're known for their steelworking.
Yeah, and I love that, actually, that first scene when like the What a Feeling song, there's kind of this like metallic kind of edge that like Moroder's like added to it. Like you know what I'm talking about in the instrumental portion, like chunk, chunk. I can't replicate it with my voice. Just at the beginning of the song, there's just like a little bit of a metallic sound, like it's like a Metropolis feel to it. And I think Moroder actually made a new soundtrack for the movie Metropolis too. So like he's got sometimes that industrial feel, like just in a few of these songs, which I thought really was awesome.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past him. He is a legend for a reason.
And like it makes it such a different movie to be set in Pittsburgh than it would be if it was set in LA, right? Like or in Vegas, like Showgirls or something, right? Like dancing in a place you don't expect it.
Ironically, I believe the conservatory is in LA.
Oh yeah,
like where
yeah,
they
where
shot
they
it.
actually shot it. Yeah, I'm sure. Like I'm sure they didn't want to like spend that long in Pittsburgh, sadly, but yeah, even when they do shoot like something in a place like Baltimore, I think he's just not that into you. Did like a little bit in Baltimore and then everything else in LA, like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Or it's like, oh, we'll just call Vancouver
nowadays,
Pittsburgh,
yeah.
True.
or Georgia. So now that you've had, I mean, obviously we've had a lot of time with the soundtrack. I know that you've had feelings about songs when you're younger and now as an adult. What would you consider to be your top 3 songs?
So do you want me to go first? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, you're the guest.
Man. So my top 3 songs are probably different than what are like the top 3 like best songs on the soundtrack, probably. I think my top 3 now would be, oh my god, I can't do, no, somebody else has to go first. I'm sorry somebody Nicole, could you go first to allow me some time, like we're ordering at a restaurant, or like
we're ordering at a restaurant, like no, you go, I'll be ready in a second. Gosh, I don't know, it's hard, you know, like I have this is where I tell you guys that I have a really weird relationship to 80s music, right? Like I'm not really a nostalgia person in the sense that like it brings me back to like a good place all of the time. And so sometimes I listen to things like this and they feel like an artifact of portions of my life that I'm like, yeah, I don't necessarily want to go back there. So I try to kind of like revisit them with like a fresh mind and not necessarily like I'm still 2 or 3 or 5. Looking at this soundtrack again and trying to kind of be a little bit more of like, I'm looking at this objectively as an adult. I mean, I do like I'll Be Where the Heart Is. I like Kim Carnes' vocal on that. And you brought that up earlier. I love Flashdance, What a Feeling. I just think it's like a classic, like power moment in pop. And it did like, it feels so cliche. And so I'm so sorry to do this, not with deep cuts, but like, I like Seduce Me Tonight a little bit for that like Marauder edge. And then I like Maniac. I like it. I mean, it's fun. That might be 4, but they're fun.
Maniac will definitely get you pumped to exercise, right? Like I watch even that scene in the movie and I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I not in a gym? Why am I not dancing?
Right? I just got a Peloton not that long ago and I'm like, I'd Peloton to that. Peloton my ass off to Maniac. Like I get it. And so there's something that like, you know, is very transcendent. If you can still have, there's still like an audience for something like that. It means that it taps into something good.
Okay, I've had enough time to decide what I'm ordering. So I'm gonna keep Romeo from when I was a kid. I just love that song, like my Romeo. Oh. It's so catchy. Just like, just the uchaka, uchaka, uchaka. It's just so, I don't know what Donna Summer's doing, but I like it. It goes fast. It's like jazzy. Love that song. It reminds me of having crushes on people in the second grade, which is a little weird, but like that was the song I always associated with my little second grade crushes. And then Imagination, I just think the lyrics are interesting. It's an interesting song. I love the line, "You've got to walk right through that fire. It will not burn you." I love the lyrics, and I love the it's kind of a weird song, right? And then finally, I hated this song when I was a kid, so this is weird, but Lady, 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 it resurged for me with Call Me By Your Name. I heard it then and I was like, this is a beautiful love song and I dig it and I can sing it and sing along to it and feel good. So yeah, those are going to be my 3.
Moment of truth, Ryan. What are you ordering?
I got a sign. I'm gonna go with What a Feeling, because how can you not? I think I'm also gonna go with Lady, 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 and with Romeo as well. I just can't deal with Maniac as a standalone song anymore. I think it's just been kind of like overused in things to the point where like it's self-parody.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it's a joke at this point.
I like a joke song, so that's probably why I'm into it, honestly. Like I like something that I can belt at karaoke and not be embarrassed.
Nice.
That's fair. I just feel like it's like, I don't know. Like if if Family Ties or not if Family Matters was gonna have like a dance off, like Steve Urkel would pick Maniac as his song.
I also think that like I like that I know what to do with my body during a song, and I know what to do with Maniac.
You just get hyped as long as you have high energy. It doesn't matter what you're doing for that song.
Yeah.
Basically, like you just do the thing with your feet.
Yeah, do the thing with your feet, or you can turn around repeatedly, and we see like the thigh view, which I have to say, I did like the thigh view. It was the leotard thing was cool. I liked it.
Oh yeah, that is cool.
I don't think I could turn around like that though, so it wouldn't work for me. Oh well.
Yeah, I break a hip.
So I'm just thinking. I know that you were talking about how this movie kind of, I don't want to say triggered, but like you saw this movie and you're talking about how it kind of affected your sexuality, or the chicken or the egg thing with your sexuality. Is that just like an Adrian Lyne thing? Because like I still remember like being like 10 and watching, like not even watching the movie, but like watching the trailer for Indecent Proposal, and like Demi Moore like on the bed like covered in money, and being like, I probably like am not supposed to be seeing that, but I really find that provocative.
It makes me feel some kind of way. Like also the screenplay is co-written by, did we already say this, by Joe Esterhaus, who is the guy that wrote Showgirls. And I feel like there's something like very like deeply weird, like a deeply weird kind of sexy that's in a lot of these films that we've discussed, like all like in the universe of Flashdance. Right?
Yeah, I haven't seen Showgirls, but I feel like in the backstage, I haven't seen it. In the backstage scenes where the dancers are talking, I was like, this feels like Showgirls to me, even though I haven't seen it.
Flashdance is better than Showgirls. I mean, Showgirls...
Flashdance is objectively better than Showgirls, but Showgirls is so weird and so wide. There's something about it that makes a great, like, just...
I mean... What's your favorite scary movie? Showgirls. Like there's a reason that's a line in Scream 2. It's a good movie though. It's interesting. Right. Well, it's not a good movie, but it's a good movie to watch. Put it that way.
It's a good bad movie.
But to your question though, like I think it's not really Adrian Lyne, although I do think his films like speak to me on a certain level. For me, I think it was more just like this series of powerful women, and it's weird maybe to call Alex powerful, but I do feel she was portrayed as powerful, living on her own, and then like bike commuting and doing a blue collar job, and then she's dancing and expressing her sexuality. She's in that scene at the dinner where she's not afraid to say like, I fucked his brains out, or like just be really open and sexual, and it's not shamed. She is not shamed for that in the movie, in the plot, right? And then you had a through line from that to like Madonna, and there's more exhibitionism in Madonna. Like if you watch her video for Open Your Heart, she's like literally working in a peep show. Like I grew up with all these images of like, on the one hand, these very powerful women, on the other hand, behaving very sexually, and like that being portrayed as good. And I think that really did like ingrain itself in me. And like just the example of women asking men out and like taking power of their sexuality, of how that's going to go. Like that really stuck with me. Like, I mean, it's probably also because I grew up as a nerd, so I wasn't really being asked out that much. So I had to ask guys out. But I feel like that. And then Dirty Dancing, too. Like Baby is the one who portrays, you know, Johnny in that movie. She's the one who actually makes a move on Johnny. And you didn't see that as much in some later movies, I think. I think the 80s was kind of like this interesting time of certainly feminism wasn't super advanced yet, but like women were kind of breaking out. Like women were kind of taking over these male roles in the workplace, and they were taking over like these supposedly male roles in sexual relationships. And I grew up in that kind of furnace, right? Like that like little pocket.
Yeah. And even though she works for Nick, you never feel like she really needs him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and it's not about like, oh, then she gets promoted because she doesn't really care about the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she specifically doesn't want his help to get into the dance conservatory. She gets pissed at him when he does kind of give her a hand, which like in retrospect, I'm like, take the help. But like at the time, I couldn't understand why you want to make it on your own. You want to do this like without, you know, using that system, you know, nepotism or whatever.
Right. He also has, his character is also kind of weird because he frequents this dance club, but then he is also like super classy. Like I know people on the arts board.
Is it? Yeah. Isn't it in the plot somewhere that like he grew up in that neighborhood or something? I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like he grew up with like Johnny C. I used to like steal stuff from him.
I mean, there are definitely like some leaps in this
right.
movie. Like you gotta suspend.
Like they never explain like how he ended up with his own company.
You gotta suspend your disbelief a little bit, and I think with this one, you have to really lean into like the energy and the power and the assertiveness of this very strong female character and this very strong female-led story, which is, I think, the ultimate attraction of it. Right? Is more that energy and less about like that's a really weird plot hole.
Yeah, I never really stopped to think about what they were welding either. Yeah, so
because you're not supposed
to. Or how
to.
Nick got a red bow on her pit bull at the end of the movie, or any of.
Yeah, I mean, again, like in an action movie that's just like fun and frenzied, and you're into it and you're entertained. Like people don't you don't get mad about stuff like this. I feel like people pick apart movies like this for having holes. But why can't you just enjoy it for what it is?
I think when we podcast, the nature of things is to pick apart things too, though. I think that's stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can critique it all day, but at the end, whether it's a soundtrack or it's a movie or it's both, like it's really just how it hits you. Do you enjoy it or do you not? Like, do you have a visceral enjoyment?
Plus, I mean, we should
this,
just be amazed that this movie that they made for $7 million
are you bothered
ended
by
up grossing 200.
Wow, was it that high?
And especially how sparse.
$7 million actually seems kind of high though for 83.
Spent it all on the breakdancing.
It was all of those uncredited body doubles.
Oh yeah, well there's that too. Or apparently Adrian.
I just thought that was an 80s thing
in his filming for some reason too. I don't know if that was the smoke machine budget or.
If it's dark, there's smoke coming out somewhere. Well, thank you, Jennifer, for coming on our podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun. I'm glad to be able to like talk to you both. Like this is the first time we've actually talked and not on Twitter. So
yeah,
really
that's
cool.
That's right. So I'm glad that we got to talk. And how often do episodes of Every Rom-Com come out for our listeners who want to check it out?
Oh. Well, that's an interesting question, which I can't quite answer, but we try to get them out every 2 weeks. A lot of research goes into each episode, so there was a little gap while I was preparing our musicals series. But yeah, we're in our musicals series right now. We're trying to get them out every 2 weeks. We're going to be covering a wide range of musicals, from all the way from Top Hat to up to In the Heights. So we're looking forward to that.
Mirandaverse.
Nice. Yeah.
And should I tell where you can find it or anything like that? Is that something?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. And if you want to see the podcast, you can find us like wherever you get your podcasts. We're also at EveryRomCom.com. We're on Facebook at EveryRomCom Podcast and Blog. We're on Twitter at EveryRomComPod. And we're on Instagram at EveryRomCom. So pretty similar across the platforms, except on Twitter, there is actually somebody who's just at EveryRomCom, but they are not us. So
yeah, so don't go to Soundtrack Cast on Twitter either, because that's somebody else.
Yeah. We're going to get on Blue Sky and we're going to nail that handle in the beta.
So you can find us on Twitter at soundtrack_your and on Instagram at soundtrackcast. And if you would like to support our podcast, you can also go to patreon.com/soundtrackyourlife. But thanks again, Jen. It was really fun talking about Flashdance with you.
Thank you. What a feeling.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.